Beneath the surface of our world lies a secret that history almost forgot. An underground civilization carved into stone built thousands of years before modern technology existed. Who created it? Why was it hidden? And what mysteries are still waiting below? Welcome to the underground world built before history remembered. If you love forgotten civilizations and ancient mysteries, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more discoveries beyond history. The passage is barely wide enough for one person to enter. The ceiling presses low the walls close in, and every step carries farther than it should through the darkness. Behind the daylight of central Anatolia shrinks to a thin grey wound. Ahead the tunnel bends sharply and disappears. There is no grand entrance, no carved gate announcing a city, only a narrow opening cut into pale volcanic stone, and a descent that seems at first like little more than a cellar. Then the floor drops again. A second tunnel appears. A chamber opens to one side, blackened by old smoke. Another stairway twists downward, and the air begins to move with a faint, unnatural steadiness. Somewhere below, invisible in the rock, a shaft is breathing. This is where the scale of the mystery begins to reveal itself. Beneath the plains and eroded hills of Cappadocia lies a world made not by nature alone, but by human hands working through stone generation after generation. Rooms branch into corridors. Corridors descend into deeper rooms. Storage chambers, kitchens, animal stalls, wells, churches, sleeping spaces, burial areas, and defensive passages extend through levels that appear to have been planned, enlarged, altered, sealed, reopened, and reused over immense stretches of time. At places such as Derinkuyu and Kaymakli, the underground is not a single shelter or hidden chamber. It is an engineered environment capable of concealing thousands of people beneath a landscape where from the surface almost nothing gives them away. The most unsettling part is not that people lived underground. Humans have always used caves, mines, cellars, and rock shelters. The unsettling part is how completely this hidden landscape seems designed around disappearance. Entrances can be concealed within houses and courtyards. Narrow tunnels force an approaching enemy to crawl or move in single file. Great circular stones taller than a person and pierced with small central holes can be rolled across passages from the inside, turning a corridor into a sealed wall. Ventilation shafts plunge through many levels, drawing air into rooms that would otherwise become uninhabitable. Water can be accessed without returning to the surface. Food can be stored beyond the reach of heat weather and raiders. Entire communities could vanish beneath the ground while armies, bandits, or rival powers moved across the land above them. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The people who entered these cities were not stepping into ceremonial tombs or symbolic underworlds. They were entering practical spaces built around survival. Yet practical does not mean simple. The architecture shows an intimate understanding of the rock, of airflow, of pressure, of movement, and of fear. Builders know where corridors must narrow. They know how thick a wall must remain between chambers. They know that animals need separate ventilation, that fires must be controlled, that smoke must be directed, and that a deep refuge becomes useless if its water source can be poisoned from above. These are not the decisions of people improvising for a single night. What survives in the record suggests repeated occupation, repeated danger, and a long tradition of adapting the underground to new needs. Even now the darkness resists certainty. Derinkuyu is often described as an underground city extending many levels below the surface, but the exact number of accessible excavated or original levels varies depending on how the site is defined. Parts remain blocked by debris collapse or later alterations. Some corridors end abruptly not because the builders necessarily stopped, but because modern exploration cannot safely continue. Other passages may have connected to rooms now destroyed by erosion, farming construction, or centuries of reuse. Archaeologists can study tool marks, pottery architecture, religious symbols and patterns of occupation, but dating carved spaces is notoriously difficult. Stone does not record the moment it was hollowed out. A chamber can be cut in one era, expanded in another, painted in a third, and filled with objects from a fourth. This has allowed legends to grow in the gaps. Some claim the cities were built by a lost civilization before recorded history. Others imagine survivors of a forgotten catastrophe, retreating beneath the earth while the surface world burned, froze, or flooded. The most extreme versions speak of unknown technologies, or peoples erased from every other trace of the past. These ideas are dramatic, but the evidence remains incomplete, and no single discovery requires a vanished super-civilization to explain the underground cities. The rock is soft enough to carve with ordinary tools, and Cappadocia has been occupied by many cultures across thousands of years. The more difficult question is not whether known ancient peoples could build such places. They clearly could. The question is when the first chambers were cut, why they were expanded so extensively, and how many different communities contributed to the world below. The landscape above offers few immediate answers. Cappadocia appears open and exposed a region of broad plateaus, dry valleys, and strange stone formations shaped by wind and water. Cones, pillars, and ridges rise from the ground like the ruins of something older than architecture. Settlements cling to slopes or gather around fields where soil covers ancient volcanic deposits. In such a place, danger can be seen coming from far away, but there are few natural barriers behind which a population can hide. A fortified town might resist an attack, but it can also be surrounded. A mountain refuge may be defensible, but it leaves fields and water sources behind. The underground offers another strategy entirely. It does not stop an enemy at the horizon. It allows the people themselves to be removed from the visible world. Imagine the moment when the warning arrives. Smoke on a distant ridge. Riders seen beyond the fields. A messenger moving quickly between villages. Grain is gathered. Animals are driven toward concealed entrances. Families carry lamps, bedding tools, and jars down steep steps worn smooth by countless feet. Stone doors are rolled into place. Behind them, the sounds of the surface become dull and uncertain. A population waits in chambers lit by flame-breathing air drawn through shafts cut long before anyone now living was born. Above houses may be searched, barns broken open and roads watched. Below, life contracts into whispers, smoke, animal heat, and the knowledge that a thin wall of stone separates survival from discovery. How often this happened is unknown. Whether the earliest builders imagined cities of such scale is also unclear. The first hollowed rooms may have been simple storage pits, cool spaces for grain, wine, and tools. A cellar becomes a hiding place gains another chamber, a second exit is cut, a shaft is deepened. Centuries pass and every generation inherits not a finished city but an unfinished solution. By the time written history begins to notice the people of this region, the underground may already contain layers of decisions whose original purposes have been forgotten. That is the central tension beneath Cappadocia. The cities are real, vast, and unmistakably human, yet their beginnings are blurred by reuse. Later occupants leave churches, crosses, pottery, and traces of organized Christian communities. Earlier phases are harder to name. Scholars still debate which peoples first began the work and how far back the oldest construction reaches. The deepest mystery is not hidden in one sealed chamber waiting to reveal a lost age. It lies in the slow accumulation of human effort in rooms cut and recut until the builders themselves disappear from memory. And before the first tunnel can be understood, the stone itself must be understood, because this underground world begins not with war, religion, or legend, but with fire rising from the earth, millions of years before any human hand enters the dark. Long before tunnels, stone doors, hidden wells, or the first frightened families disappeared beneath the ground, Cappadocia is shaped by eruptions so violent that they transform the centre of Anatolia into a landscape of ash. Volcanoes dominate the region over immense spans of geological time. Mount Erciyes, Hassan Dar, and other volcanic centres release clouds of hot debris, pumice ash, and fragmented rock that spread across the land in repeated layers. Some deposits arrive in glowing avalanches, moving faster than a person could run, and hot enough to erase nearly everything in their path. Others settle more slowly, blanketing valleys and plains. Over time, the material cools and hardens into thick formations of volcanic tuff, a stone that appears solid but remains soft enough to be cut with relatively simple tools. This quality becomes the foundation of the underground world. Tuff can support chambers when carved carefully, yet it yields more easily than harder rocks such as granite or basalt. A person using iron tools can remove it steadily. Even earlier stone or bronze implements may have been capable of shaping weaker deposits, though the speed and scale of the work would vary considerably. The rock allows builders to create not only small caves, but whole interiors, flat floors, rounded ceilings, benches, niches, doorways, staircases, storage pits, shafts and corridors. It is forgiving enough to work, but not so loose that every opening immediately collapses. That balance is unusual, and in Cappadocia it exists across a vast region. The landscape above is also carved from the same volcanic inheritance. Rainwater, snowmelt, temperature change, and wind attack the softer deposits, cutting gullies and valleys into the plateau. Harder layers sometimes protect the softer stone beneath them, producing tall pillars capped by dark rock. These formations are often called fairy chimneys, though their origins require no folklore. They are products of uneven erosion surviving because one layer resists destruction slightly longer than another. Cliffs become honeycombed with natural hollows and human-cut rooms. Ravines twist through the plateau. From a distance, the region can seem barren and exposed, but up close, it contains folds, hidden slopes, and rock faces that can be entered almost anywhere. This combination of softness and concealment encourages people to build into the land rather than only upon it. Houses can be extended backward into cliffs. Storerooms can be excavated below courtyards. Animal shelters can be carved beside living spaces. Churches can be cut into isolated valleys. Pigeon houses can be opened high in rock faces, allowing communities to collect droppings for fertilizer. The underground cities are the most dramatic expression of this tradition, but they belong to a wider culture of rock-cut architecture that becomes deeply practical in Cappadocia. The boundary between a natural cave, an enlarged shelter, and a fully artificial chamber is not always clear. Human beings alter the geology so thoroughly that the landscape itself begins to function like architecture. The stone also offers thermal stability. Temperatures underground change far less than temperatures on the surface. Summers in central Anatolia can be hot and dry, while winters bring cold snow and strong winds. Beneath the earth, grain, fruit, wine, and other supplies can be stored in cooler and more consistent conditions. Food spoils more slowly. Water evaporates less quickly. Animals can be protected from extreme weather. A storage chamber cut into tuff is useful even when no enemy is approaching. This matters because the underground world likely does not begin as a single military project. It grows from ordinary needs that are later adapted to extraordinary danger. A shallow chamber beneath a house may first hold jars. Another chamber may be added for grain. A lower level may provide better insulation. A narrow connecting passage may allow one household to reach another without going outside. Once political conditions become unstable, these same spaces can be deepened and defended. The practical architecture of food and shelter becomes the architecture of survival. What begins as convenience develops into concealment, and concealment eventually becomes a network. Yet the rock is not endlessly cooperative. Carving underground requires careful judgment. Tuff varies in hardness, thickness, and strength. Some layers are dense enough to hold large rooms, others fracture easily or crumble when exposed to air and moisture. Builders must leave supporting walls and columns. They must avoid cutting too close to neighbouring chambers. A ventilation shaft placed poorly can weaken a ceiling or create a route for smoke to collect. Wells must be protected from contamination. Passages must connect without opening into unstable ground. Evidence of collapses, blocked tunnels, and repairs shows that failure is part of the history too. The underground cities are impressive not because the stone makes construction effortless, but because generations learn how to work within its limits. The tools leave only part of the story. Pick marks survive in walls. Rough surfaces reveal where stone was removed quickly, while smoother spaces suggest repeated use or later finishing. But stone fragments from excavation had to go somewhere. Some may have been carried outside and spread across fields or used in construction. Others may have been crushed or dumped into abandoned chambers. Large-scale underground building produces enormous quantities of debris, and the removal of that material would require organized labor. Work crews need light air, food, and coordination. A deep chamber cannot be carved safely by one person acting alone. Even modest expansion suggests households or communities cooperating over time. No single explanation fully accounts for when or why this labor begins. The geology creates opportunity, but opportunity is not motive. Many regions contain soft stone without developing cities below ground. Cappadocia's particular history adds pressure to the possibility. It sits within Anatolia, a land crossed repeatedly by armies, migrants, traders, empires, and raiding groups. Routes pass between the Mediterranean world, Mesopotamia, the Iranian plateau, and the Black Sea. Kingdoms rise around it, absorb it, divide it, and fight over it. A population living on open ground in such a corridor learns that walls are useful, distance is useful, and invisibility may be more useful still. Climate may also shape behavior. Periods of drought, severe winters, crop failure, or local instability increase the importance of stored food. Underground chambers protect supplies not only from weather, but from theft and destruction. A village able to hide grain has a better chance of surviving a raid. A community able to shelter livestock protects both food and wealth. The line between a refuge for people and a vault for survival becomes thin. There is another advantage in the stone's appearance: what is removed can be hidden within what remains. Surface fortifications advertise value. Towers, gates, and walls announce that something worth defending lies behind them. Underground construction can be nearly invisible. An entrance may exist beneath a floor, behind a wall, inside a stable, or at the end of a narrow courtyard. Once closed, it becomes part of the ordinary settlement. An enemy might seize the surface and still fail to understand the scale of what lies below. That invisibility is possible only because volcanic catastrophe first creates a rock that humans can reshape. Fire produces ash. Ash becomes stone. Stone becomes shelter. Shelter becomes a city. The process unfolds across millions of years, but its final transformation depends on people who recognize that the ground beneath them is not merely something to stand on. It is a material that can be entered, hollowed, organized, and made to hold an entire society. The builders who first recognized this possibility leave no clear declaration behind. Their names are uncertain, their dates disputed, and their earliest chambers difficult to separate from later work. Yet somewhere in the long human occupation of Cappadocia, the first deliberate cut is made into the volcanic rock, and the underground story passes from geology into history. The first hands to enter the stone leave almost no signature behind. There are no foundation tablets, no royal inscriptions, no carved dates announcing when the earliest chambers are opened. Instead, there are tool marks, altered passages, buried floors, fragments of pottery, traces of soot, and walls that have been cut through, sealed, widened, or reused so many times that the original shape of the place is difficult to recover. Every later generation changes what came before. A storage room becomes a stable becomes a refuge gains a chapel. A passage is blocked, another is opened, and the oldest surfaces disappear beneath newer work. This is why the question of origins remains so difficult. Underground architecture does not preserve time in the same way as a buried building above ground. A collapsed house can trap a moment. Its floor may hold pottery tools, food remains, and debris from a single destruction. A carved chamber can remain in use for centuries. Objects found inside may belong to its final occupants rather than its first builders. Even when archaeologists uncover ancient material, it does not always prove that the chamber itself was cut at the same time. The evidence remains incomplete because people repeatedly clean, empty, enlarge, and repurpose these spaces. Several ancient cultures have been proposed as the first major builders. The Hittites are often mentioned because they control much of Anatolia during the 2nd millennium BCE and possess advanced systems of fortification, administration, metalworking, and regional movement. They certainly have the technical ability to carve defensive spaces, and some rock-cut features in central Anatolia may date to their era. Yet no decisive evidence shows that the vast underground complexes known today were created as complete Hittite cities. The idea is plausible in limited form but becomes uncertain when extended to every level and tunnel. Others point to the Phrygians who rise to prominence after the collapse of the Hittite world. Phrygian communities are experienced stoneworkers, and their presence in Anatolia is well established. They carve monuments, tombs, and architectural spaces into rock, making them strong candidates for at least some early underground expansion. Later Persian rule, Hellenistic kingdoms, Roman administration, and Byzantine settlement add further layers. Cappadocia is not occupied by one people with one plan. It is a crossroads where populations inherit structures from those who came before and adapt them to new pressures. The earliest phase may not belong to a powerful kingdom at all. It may begin with farmers whose names are completely lost. A family cutting a cool storage chamber beneath a house leaves less archaeological drama than an emperor building a fortress, but over generations such practical decisions can reshape an entire settlement. Grain needs protection from heat and moisture. Wine benefits from stable temperatures. Valuable seed must be hidden during raids. Livestock needs shelter during severe weather. None of these needs requires a city at first. They require only a room, then another room, then a passage connecting them. The idea of a single founding moment may therefore be misleading. Derinkuyu and other underground settlements could be the result of accumulation rather than sudden design. The oldest cores may have been small and scattered, later joined into larger systems. Some chambers may predate others by centuries. One neighborhood may have begun as domestic storage, while another served as a temporary refuge. When danger becomes more frequent, separate spaces can be connected. When populations grow, lower levels can be added. What appears today as one city may be the fused result of many smaller projects. Tool marks offer clues, but they rarely provide certainty. Different cutting methods can sometimes indicate changes in technique, while variations in corridor shape and chamber design may reveal different construction phases. Yet later builders often follow older forms, and simple tools can remain in use for long periods. Iron picks make excavation faster, but soft tuff does not require highly advanced technology. This weakens popular claims that only a forgotten civilization with unknown engineering knowledge could have created the underground world. The achievement lies less in mysterious tools than in sustained labor, careful planning and accumulated experience. The oldest passages are often assumed to be the deepest, but even that is not always reliable. Builders may cut downward from a later surface entrance, while earlier spaces closer to the surface are destroyed by erosion or construction. Floors change as debris accumulates, entrances move. Natural cavities are expanded and absorbed into artificial systems. A chamber that appears primitive may simply have been carved quickly, while a more refined room may belong to an earlier group with better resources. Underground chronology is rarely a neat descent from new to old. Written traditions provide only limited help. Ancient texts describe peoples, kingdoms, wars, roads, and religious communities in Cappadocia, but they do not offer a clear account of the first underground builders. Later historians and travellers sometimes mention subterranean shelters or communities living in rock-cut spaces, yet by then the tradition is already old. The silence of earlier records does not prove the cities did not exist. Hidden places are often absent from official histories precisely because they are hidden, local and ordinary to the people who use them. There is also the possibility that secrecy is part of the missing record. Communities do not necessarily advertise escape routes, concealed wells, or underground refuges. Knowledge of entrances may be restricted to residents. A defensive system loses value if maps and descriptions circulate widely. Even after political conditions change, families may continue to treat underground spaces as private property rather than public monuments. Their history survives through use instead of writing. Some popular theories push the origins far into prehistory, suggesting that the underground cities were built in response to Ice Age catastrophe, massive flooding, volcanic winter, or a lost global civilization. These claims usually depend on the assumption that the scale of the sites must reflect a single ancient emergency. But scale alone does not establish great age. A complex expanded for 1,000 years can become enormous without requiring one forgotten event. Scholars still debate the earliest phases, but there is no accepted evidence that Cappadocia's underground cities were created by an advanced civilization before known human history. Still dismissing exaggerated theories does not remove the real mystery. The absence of a lost super-civilization does not tell us who cut the first room. Archaeology may narrow the possibilities, but it cannot yet restore the identity of the earliest builders. The oldest occupation could involve local Anatolian communities whose material traces are sparse and whose work is buried beneath later modification. Their achievement may survive everywhere in the underground cities while their names survive nowhere. That anonymity changes the nature of the story. These places are not monuments built to preserve the fame of rulers. They are works shaped by people whose success depends on avoiding notice. Their architecture points inward away from public display. No towering facade is required. No victory relief is carved above the entrance. The builders invest labor in spaces that remain invisible from the horizon. Their greatest accomplishment is not to be remembered but to endure. As centuries pass, each new population inherits a partly finished underworld. They do not need to understand every original purpose. They only need to recognize the usefulness of what is already there. A sealed room can be reopened. A narrow shaft can be deepened. A forgotten corridor can become an escape route. The first builders vanish, but their decisions continue to guide hands that come long after them, and the scattered chambers begin to grow into something far more complex than any one generation may have intended. The underground city does not appear all at once. It grows slowly, almost invisibly, as one generation modifies what another has left behind. A chamber cut for grain becomes too small, so a second room is opened beyond it. A family shelter gains a passage to a neighbour's cellar. A narrow tunnel is widened where animals must pass. A shaft is extended downward in search of cooler air, safer storage, or deeper concealment. Over decades, then centuries, the separate decisions begin to connect. What was once a collection of practical spaces becomes a system, and the system becomes large enough to shelter a community. This gradual growth helps explain the irregular character of places such as Derinkuyu and Keimakli. Their corridors do not always follow a single geometric plan. Levels vary in height. Rooms differ in shape and purpose. Some areas are carefully finished while others remain rough and cramped. Passages sometimes turn sharply for no obvious reason, descend steeply or narrow, until only one person can move through at a time. These features can look chaotic, but they may reflect the history of expansion. Builders are not working on untouched ground. They are negotiating earlier chambers' natural weaknesses in the rock property boundaries, shafts, wells, and spaces whose original functions have changed. A city built above ground usually begins with streets, walls, and visible limits. An underground settlement grows differently. Its boundaries are hidden. Expansion can occur beneath houses, courtyards, fields, and slopes without changing the surface dramatically. One household may excavate downward while another cuts sideways. Eventually the spaces meet. A connecting tunnel turns separate refuges into a shared network. Once connected, the community gains advantages that no isolated cellar can provide. People can move between districts without emerging. Supplies can be redistributed. Entrances can be abandoned if compromised. Air can circulate through multiple routes. The loss of one chamber does not necessarily mean the loss of the whole refuge, yet connection also introduces risk. A tunnel linking two areas can allow an enemy to penetrate farther if discovered. Smoke, disease, or panic can spread through the same passages that carry people and supplies. Defensive architecture becomes increasingly important as the network grows. Corridors are narrowed deliberately. Doorways are positioned so that large circular stones can be rolled across them from the protected side. Small holes through the center of these stones may allow defenders to observe, communicate, or strike at anyone attempting to break through. The stones are too large to move freely through the entire complex, suggesting they are placed near the passages they are meant to seal. The defensive logic is simple and severe. A large attacking force has little advantage in a tunnel where only one person can advance at a time. Weapons become difficult to use. Shields cannot be maneuvered easily. Torches produce smoke and reveal movement. Defenders familiar with every turn can retreat behind successive barriers, forcing intruders deeper into unfamiliar darkness. Even a modest group can hold a narrow passage if the route is properly designed. The underground city transforms numbers into a disadvantage. Some passages may also have been created as traps or delays rather than ordinary routes. Steep shafts, abrupt drops, dead ends, and confusing branches can disorient anyone who does not know the layout. It is tempting to interpret every unusual feature as part of a sophisticated defensive plan, but caution is necessary. A blocked corridor may simply be unfinished. A sudden change in level may follow stronger rock. A narrow section may result from later collapse. The evidence remains incomplete, and not every irregularity was necessarily intentional. Still, the repeated appearance of controlled choke points strongly suggests that defense plays a central role in later expansion. Organization on this scale requires social coordination. Someone must decide where a new tunnel can be cut. Labor must be divided. Stone debris must be removed without drawing attention. Ventilation must be preserved as deeper levels are added. Existing chambers cannot be weakened by careless excavation nearby. This implies shared knowledge passed between builders, whether through specialized craftsmen, household traditions, or community oversight. The cities may not have been designed by architects in the modern sense, but they are not accidental labyrinths either. Construction would have been exhausting. Workers labor in dim light, swinging picks in confined spaces while dust thickens the air. Oil lamps consume oxygen and stain ceilings with soot. Every basket of broken tuff must be carried upward or moved into unused cavities. Progress is slow, especially in narrow passages where only one or two people can work. The deeper the excavation goes, the harder it becomes to remove debris. Larger rooms require ceilings to be shaped carefully to distribute weight. A mistake can bury workers or damage chambers above. The labor is likely spread over long periods, which makes the enormous scale more understandable. A community does not need to excavate an entire city during a single crisis. It adds to the underground during stable years, preparing for dangers that may come later. A new storage room is useful immediately. A deeper passage may take seasons to complete. Repairs continue after collapses. Entrances are relocated as surface buildings change. The city remains unfinished because survival itself is never finished. Lesser-known details reveal how flexible these spaces could be. Some chambers contain large stone blocks with holes that may have supported presses used for wine or oil. Others include troughs tethering points or low partitions suited to animals. Storage pits are shaped to keep grain cool and dry. Certain rooms may have served as schools, meeting spaces, or communal areas, although assigning precise functions is difficult when movable objects have disappeared. A room's shape offers clues, but later occupants can easily transform its use. This adaptability is one reason the underground cities survive through political change. A new population does not need to rebuild from the beginning. It inherits a functioning environment. Pagan families, Christian communities, farmers, refugees, and local villagers can all use the same chamber differently. Religious symbols may be carved into walls that were already ancient. A kitchen can become a workshop. A storeroom can become a burial space. The architecture remains stable while the meaning changes. Over time, certain areas become more organized than others. Upper levels easier to reach and ventilate may hold animals, food preparation, and frequent daily activity. Deeper levels provide greater security but are less comfortable. They may be reserved for emergency shelter, long-term storage, or final defensive retreat. This arrangement is practical, though it likely varies between sites. Underground life is shaped by distance from the surface. Every descent brings more safety, but also less light, harder movement and greater dependence on engineered air. The city's growth therefore follows a constant negotiation between protection and habitability. Too shallow and enemies can reach it quickly. Too deep and daily life becomes difficult. Too open and movement is easy, but defense is weak. Too narrow and panic or overcrowding can become deadly. The builders solve these problems not once, but repeatedly, adjusting inherited spaces as needs change. By the time the underground network reaches its mature form, no single person can understand every phase of its creation. Some passages are already old enough to carry legends. Children may grow up using rooms whose first purpose has been forgotten. Families may know only the routes nearest their own entrances. The city becomes a collective memory carved into stone, but like all memory, it is incomplete. and as the chambers multiply, the central question changes. It is no longer only who began the first tunnel. It becomes how people actually endure inside this enclosed world, where every practical achievement must overcome darkness, smoke crowding thirst, fear, and the pressure of waiting beneath an enemy who may be standing only a few meters overhead. Survival underground depends on more than walls. A chamber can hide a family for a few hours, but a city must breathe, drink, eat, sleep, store, waste control, fire, protect animals, and remain defensible, while hundreds or perhaps thousands of people occupy it at once. The deeper the refuge extends, the more every ordinary human need becomes an engineering problem. Darkness is only the most obvious difficulty. Air can fail without warning. Smoke can collect in low ceilings. Water can become contaminated. Crowding can turn a safe chamber into a place of panic. The architecture of Cappadocia's underground settlements is remarkable because it anticipates many of these dangers with solutions that are simple, durable, and adapted to the volcanic stone. Ventilation is the central system. At Derinkuyu, deep vertical shafts descend through multiple levels, connecting chambers to the surface and allowing fresh air to circulate. Some are wide enough to resemble wells, while smaller channels branch into surrounding rooms. Warm air produced by people, animals, lamps, and fires rises through the network, helping draw cooler air downward. The principle is natural, but using it effectively requires careful placement. A shaft that serves one level poorly can leave smoke trapped in another. Openings must remain unobstructed. Rooms need access to moving air without creating direct routes for attackers. The largest shafts may have been among the earliest features around which later chambers developed. This possibility suggests that expansion follows infrastructure. Once a dependable source of air exists, rooms can be cut beside it, then connected farther outward. Deeper construction becomes practical only as ventilation keeps pace. The same shaft may serve several functions over centuries, carrying air, providing water, and acting as a central reference point in a maze where direction is otherwise difficult to judge. Water creates an even greater vulnerability. A refuge cannot remain occupied for long if inhabitants must regularly return to the surface. Some underground settlements contain wells that descend to groundwater, allowing access from within the protected complex. At Derinkuyu, portions of the water system appear designed so that certain lower wells do not open directly at the surface. This reduces the risk that enemies can poison or block them. The distinction is important. A surface well serves daily life during peace, but in a siege it becomes a point of control. A protected underground source gives the hidden population independence. Even so, no water system is completely secure. Groundwater levels change. Waste can seep into lower areas. Animals increase contamination risks. Open containers collect dust and soot. Water must be carried through narrow passages, probably in jars or skins, and spillage makes floors slippery. Archaeologists can identify wells and channels, but the daily management of water leaves little trace. What survives in the record suggests careful separation between drinking areas, livestock spaces, storage rooms, and places where waste accumulates. Food storage is another advantage built directly into the stone. Underground temperatures remain relatively stable through summer heat and winter cold. Grain can be kept in bins or sealed pits. Dried fruit, legumes, oil, wine, and preserved meat last longer when protected from sunlight and sudden temperature change. Large jars can be placed in niches where they're less likely to break. Some vessels may have been lowered into rooms before entrances were narrowed, creating storage that is difficult to remove but easy to defend. Grinding grain, baking bread, pressing grapes, and preparing meals require more active spaces. Kitchens can be identified by blackened ceilings, hearths, and soot deposits. Fires are kept small because fuel is limited and smoke is dangerous. Dung wood brush and agricultural waste may all have been burned depending on what was available. Smoke can preserve food and discourage insects, but too much of it quickly makes a chamber uninhabitable. The builders therefore place cooking areas where ventilation is strongest, often closer to upper levels. The blackening of ceilings records repeated use more clearly than many objects do. Soot accumulates gradually, sometimes covering tool marks and earlier surfaces. In some rooms, the darkness overhead is not a sign of one destructive fire, but of countless controlled flames. Generations cook beneath the same roof of stone. The stain becomes a quiet measure of occupation, though it cannot easily reveal whether that occupation is continuous or interrupted by long periods of abandonment. Animals are essential and difficult companions underground. Sheep, goats, cattle, donkeys, and perhaps poultry provide food, milk, transport, hides, manure, and wealth. Leaving them above during a raid risks losing the foundation of the household economy. Bringing them below creates noise, heat, smell, and enormous sanitation problems. Upper chambers are therefore better suited to livestock. They're easier to reach, better ventilated, and closer to exits. Troughs, tethering holes, and low barriers in some rooms support this interpretation. Moving animals through narrow entrances requires order. Frightened livestock can block a corridor or injure people. Their hooves wear floors smooth. Their breath increases humidity. Manure must be collected and moved away from sleeping and food areas. Yet manure is also useful as fuel and fertilizer, so it may be stored rather than discarded. Underground survival wastes little. Materials that would be unpleasant in normal conditions become resources when the surface is inaccessible. Sleeping spaces are harder to identify. People may rest on mats, blankets, platforms, or raised benches. Families probably occupy chambers together, preserving social units within the wider refuge. Privacy is minimal. Light comes from small oil lamps placed in niches cut into walls. These lamps illuminate only a limited area, leaving corners in darkness. Oil is valuable, so many spaces may remain dim most of the time. Movement depends on memory as much as sight. Sanitation remains one of the least visible but most important problems. Large underground populations produce waste rapidly. Some refuse can be stored in pits or sealed chambers. Other material may be carried out when conditions permit. Urine, washing, water, food scraps, ash, and animal waste all have to be managed without polluting wells or making corridors impassable. The evidence is difficult to interpret because later cleaning removes much of it. Scholars still debate how long large numbers of people could remain below continuously. It is likely that these cities function best as temporary refugees lasting days, weeks, or perhaps longer under exceptional conditions, rather than permanent homes occupied at full capacity year-round. Defense shapes every system. Circular stone doors are among the most distinctive features. These massive discs sit beside narrow passages and can be rolled into place from within. Their central holes may allow defenders to look through, pass a weapon, or communicate across the barrier. Because the doors are difficult to move once positioned, they create successive defensive layers. If one corridor is breached, inhabitants can retreat deeper and close another. Communication through the city may rely on runners, agreed signals, and intimate knowledge of routes. Sound travels unpredictably through stone. A shout can echo far down one passage and vanish in another. Smoke, fire, or collapse can isolate entire groups. Leadership becomes necessary even if no formal command structure survives in the archaeological record. Someone must manage entrances, ration supplies, assign chambers, and decide when it is safe to return above. That final decision may be the most dangerous. The city protects by concealment, but concealment requires patience. Those below cannot easily know whether attackers have left, whether houses are burning, whether wells are watched, or whether the fields have been destroyed. A hidden population may survive the raid only to emerge into hunger. The architecture reduces these risks but cannot eliminate them. It turns stone into air shafts, wells, storerooms, barriers, and living space. It gives people time, and in periods when enemies move across the plateau, time may be the difference between a village that disappears forever and one that rises again from beneath the earth. Once the stone doors close, the underground city becomes more than an engineering achievement. It becomes a human pressure chamber. Every sound grows sharper, every lamp matters, every jar of grain, every skin of water, every coughing child, and every restless animal becomes part of the shared calculation of survival. The architecture can keep an enemy out, but it cannot remove fear, fatigue, hunger, illness, or the strain of waiting in darkness while danger moves unseen across the surface. The first hours below may have been the most chaotic. Families arrive from different entrances carrying what they can. Some bring food, blankets, tools, and oil. Others arrive with little more than children and livestock. Animals resist steep passages. Clay jars strike against walls. People who know the routes guide those who do not. Entrances must be closed quickly, but not so quickly that stragglers are trapped outside. The movement has to be organized because a blocked stair or frightened animal can delay everyone behind it. Once inside, the population spreads through familiar chambers. Households may occupy the spaces connected to their own surface homes, but larger emergencies likely force people into communal arrangements. The upper levels fill first because they are easier to reach. Livestock remain near ventilated areas. Food stores are checked. Lamps are placed in wall niches. Guards take positions near choke points and stone doors. Deeper chambers are prepared in case the first defences fail. Daily life contracts immediately. On the surface, movement follows fields, roads, courtyards, and open sky. Below it follows tunnels narrow enough to control the body. People bend, crawl, turn sideways, and wait for others to pass. The city rewards those who know it intimately. A resident can move through darkness by memory, counting bends or recognizing changes in the floor. A stranger quickly becomes disoriented. The same feature that confuses an attacker can also separate a child from a parent or leave an injured person unable to find the right chamber. Light is limited and expensive. Small oil lamps provide weak flickering illumination that reaches only a short distance. Their flames consume oxygen and produce soot. Fuel must be rationed, especially during long occupation. Many passages may remain dark unless someone is moving through them. In sleeping chambers, one lamp may serve several families. The underground city is therefore not continuously lit like a modern interior. It is a landscape of small pools of flame surrounded by blackness. People adapt by listening. Footsteps reveal movement before faces appear. The scrape of a rolling stone door carries through corridors. Animals signal disturbance. Water jars, grinding stones, whispered instructions, and the low murmur of crowded rooms create a constant background noise. Silence can be reassuring when it means concealment, but it can also become threatening. A sudden absence of sound from a guarded passage may suggest that something has gone wrong. Smoke adds another layer of discomfort. Even with ventilation, cooking fires and lamps leave the air heavy. Eyes sting, throats dry. Ceilings darken over time. Those with respiratory problems suffer first. Infants and older people are especially vulnerable. The evidence remains incomplete, but prolonged occupation at high density would have been difficult, and the practical capacity of the underground cities may have been lower than dramatic modern estimates suggest. Food is simple and carefully controlled. Grain-dried legumes, preserved fruit, cheese, oil, wine, and stored meat provide calories without requiring elaborate preparation. Bread or porridge can be made in communal cooking areas. Fresh food becomes scarce quickly. Milk from animals may help, but livestock also consumes supplies. Slaughtering an animal provides meat while reducing the burden on stored fodder, though this decision sacrifices future wealth and reproduction. Survival requires choices that extend beyond the immediate crisis. Water is distributed with equal care. A protected well may keep the refuge functioning, but drawing, carrying, and storing water requires labour. Every container is valuable. Spilled water cannot simply be replaced without effort. Washing is limited. Cleanliness becomes relative. Hands, clothing, floors, and bedding absorb smoke and animal smell. The underground protects life, but comfort is not part of its promise. Waste management is relentless. Human refuse must be placed in designated pits, sealed rooms, or containers. Animal manure accumulates even faster. Ash from hearths can help absorb moisture and odour. Some waste may be moved to unused chambers until the refuge is opened again. A poorly managed section can become uninhabitable within days. Disease does not need to breach a stone door. It can grow from contaminated water, spoiled food, insects' wounds, and crowding. The social order of the surface probably continues below, but pressure changes it. Elders, religious leaders, landholders, or experienced defenders may direct decisions. Craftspeople with knowledge of ventilation wells and stone barriers become essential. Those who know hidden routes carry responsibility. Conflicts over space food and water are inevitable, though they leave no obvious archaeological trace. Cooperation is necessary, but fear does not make everyone cooperative. Children experience the underground differently. Some may have known the tunnels from ordinary storage work or previous emergencies. Others enter for the first time during panic. They are kept close because passages are dangerous, and deep shafts may be unprotected. Games, stories, prayers, and routine may help control fear, but adults must also keep them quiet near entrances. A crying child is not merely a family concern if sound might reveal a concealed refuge. Birth sickness and death do not stop because a raid has begun. A woman may go into labour below ground. An injured defender may need treatment in poor light. Fever can spread through a crowded chamber. If someone dies during a siege, the body cannot always be taken outside. Burial rooms or sealed chambers may serve an immediate practical role, though many underground burial spaces are connected to later religious use. The line between sacred custom and emergency necessity is difficult to recover. Religion likely offers structure where certainty is absent. In later Christian periods, chapels and crosses show that faith is woven directly into the underground environment. Prayers, rituals, and shared belief help communities interpret fear and endurance. Yet even before these visible Christian layers, earlier occupants probably brought their own sacred practices below. Humans rarely enter danger without carrying some understanding of fate, protection, ancestors, or the divine. The greatest psychological burden is not knowing what is happening above. There are no windows. News travels through guarded entrances or narrow observation points. Rumors spread quickly. One person believes the attackers have gone. Another hears movement. Someone reports smoke entering a shaft. A surface house may have collapsed over an exit. A well may have been discovered. Every decision to remain or emerge carries risk. Leaving too early can expose the entire community. Waiting too long can consume supplies needed for recovery. Leaders must judge from incomplete information. Scouts may use secondary exits at night, moving quietly across fields to assess damage. If those scouts fail to return, the city receives no clear answer. The underground gives protection by separating people from the world. but that separation also becomes a form of blindness. When the doors finally open, those inside do not simply return to normal life. They emerge into uncertainty. Homes may be looted, roofs burned, fields trampled, and animals left above stolen. Grain hidden below may allow the community to endure. Seed stores may determine whether crops can be planted again. Tools carried underground become the beginning of reconstruction. The city functions not only as a shelter from death, but as a vessel preserving the means to start over. This may be the most important reason such places expand through generations. People remember that the tunnels worked. A grandmother survives one raid and teaches the route to her children. A blocked corridor is repaired. A new chamber is added before the next danger. The underground becomes part of a local memory, not as a place anyone wishes to inhabit, but as the reason the settlement still exists. Above-ground empires change names and borders. Below, the same narrow passage may carry Hittite subjects, Phrygian farmers, Roman provincials, Byzantine Christians, and later villagers fleeing different enemies centuries apart. Their languages, beliefs, and rulers change, but the human experience of waiting behind stone remains remarkably similar. Darkness compresses history. It reduces survival to breathwater, food discipline, and the hope that the world above will eventually become livable again. The enemies above the stone doors are rarely the same for long. Cappadocia lies near the center of Anatolia, and Anatolia is never isolated from the movements of larger worlds. Armies cross it because roads cross it. Empires claim it because trade grain, livestock, taxes, and military routes pass through it. Refugees enter from one direction while raiders arrive from another. A village that survives one generation of danger may face a completely different threat in the next. Yet the underground city remains useful because it is built against something more permanent than any single enemy: the vulnerability of people living in open country. In the Bronze Age, central Anatolia forms part of the Hittite world, a kingdom that grows into one of the great powers of the Eastern Mediterranean. Fortified centers, royal roads, military campaigns, and competing states shape the region. When that system collapses around the end of the second millennium, BCE political authority fragments. The disappearance of strong centralized control does not create an empty land. It creates a landscape of smaller powers, migrating groups, local rulers, and uncertain loyalties. In such periods, rural communities often bear the cost first. Armies require supplies. Raiders seek animals and grain. Villages without walls become easy targets. Later, the Phrygians, Persians, Macedonians, and successor kingdoms each control or influence parts of Anatolia. Rule changes, but the practical experience of ordinary people may change less dramatically than royal histories suggest. Tax collectors arrive under new names. Garrisons occupy strategic points. Local elites adjust to new administrations. Roads remain valuable and therefore dangerous. A settlement close enough to a route to benefit from trade is also close enough to attract soldiers. Under Roman rule, Cappadocia becomes part of a vast imperial system. Roads improve, administration becomes more regular, and military power can offer periods of relative stability. Yet Roman stability is never absolute. The eastern frontier remains contested. Conflict with Parthian and later Sasanian Persia repeatedly pulls troops and resources across Anatolia. Civil wars within the empire can be as destructive as foreign invasion. Competing emperors recruit armies, seize supplies, and punish communities suspected of supporting rivals. Even when no major army enters a village, rumors of movement may be enough to drive people below. Banditry is another threat, less visible in official records but probably more common in daily life. Small groups do not need to conquer territory. They need only steal animals, food, metal tools, or people. They can arrive quickly and leave before authorities respond. Against such raiders, a large fortress may be unnecessary, but a hidden refuge is extremely effective. If houses appear abandoned and valuables have been carried underground, the attackers gain little. They may burn buildings or search courtyards, but every hour spent looking increases the chance of resistance or pursuit. Religious conflict adds another layer, especially during the centuries when Christianity spreads through the Roman world. Cappadocia becomes closely associated with early Christian communities, and later with influential theologians, monasteries, and rock-cut churches. Popular accounts often claim that the underground cities are built primarily by Christians escaping Roman persecution. This explanation contains a fragment of truth but is too simple. Christians do experience periods of persecution, and some may use existing subterranean spaces for concealment. However, persecution is uneven in time and place, and the scale of the cities likely reflects a much longer history of use. The Christian communities inherit, adapt, and expand underground architecture rather than necessarily creating it from nothing. By the Byzantine period, the threat shifts again. Cappadocia sits within the Eastern Roman world, but from the 7th century onward, Arab-Byzantine warfare repeatedly affects central Anatolia. Raiding armies cross the frontier, striking settlements, taking captives, damaging crops, and withdrawing before a full imperial response can form. These raids do not always aim at permanent conquest. Their impact can still be devastating. Villages need ways to survive temporary occupation without surrendering their population and stored food. The underground cities are well suited to this pattern of danger. They are less useful against an enemy determined to remain for months and excavate every entrance, but highly effective against fast-moving forces with limited time. Raiders cannot search every slope cellar and concealed shaft. They may know that underground refuges exist without knowing their exact layout. Even when an entrance is found, a narrow defended passage can consume time and lives. The attackers must decide whether the people below are worth the effort. This does not mean every refuge remains undiscovered. Some must have been breached. Stone doors can be forced or bypassed. Ventilation shafts can reveal activity. Smoke can betray occupied chambers. A captured resident might be compelled to reveal hidden entrances. An enemy familiar with local architecture could block exits or wait near wells. The underground is an advantage, not a guarantee. No single explanation fully accounts for its success across every period, and the archaeological record rarely preserves the exact circumstances of an attack. The most effective defense may have been secrecy before the crisis begins. Entrances hidden inside homes are difficult to identify once furniture mats or storage containers cover them. Surface buildings can be arranged so that doorways appear ordinary. Passages may connect several households, allowing residents to enter through different points. False rooms, blocked tunnels, and secondary exits complicate the search. Knowledge of the system belongs to the community, while outsiders see only an apparently deserted settlement. The underground cities may also support a broader strategy of resilience rather than simple hiding. A village survives a raid if its people, seed, grain, breeding animals, tools, and water remain intact. Buildings above can be rebuilt, crops can be replanted. A population carried away as captives cannot be replaced so easily. The tunnels preserve the human core of the settlement and enough resources to recover afterward. This helps explain why the underground world expands even during periods when immediate danger may seem distant. Communities remember cycles. A generation of peace does not erase stories of earlier destruction. Parents show children where the entrances lie. Tools remain stored near defensive doors. Chambers are cleaned and maintained. New tunnels are opened not because an attack is certain tomorrow, but because the cost of being unprepared is understood. There is a dry practicality to this kind of architecture. Surface rulers erect walls to display strength. Underground villagers invest in not being seen. One form of defense declares power, the other admits vulnerability and survives through it. The cities below Cappadocia are not monuments to military victory. They are monuments to the expectation that armies will come and eventually leave. Over centuries, Hittite authority, Persian administration, Roman order, Byzantine Christianity, Arab raids, Seljuk expansion, and later political changes all pass across the same landscape. It would be misleading to connect every phase directly to every tunnel, but the repeated instability gives the underground cities their enduring value. Each era supplies new reasons to use old stone, and yet the deeper the cities descend, the less clearly their expansion can be tied to recorded events. Upper rooms reveal familiar patterns of occupation. Lower passages are harder to date, harder to interpret, and often inaccessible. Some end behind collapsed rock. Others seem to continue beyond the mapped city. Beneath the layers built for known enemies lies another uncertainty: how far down the original network truly went, and how much of it remains sealed beyond reach. The deepest levels change the atmosphere of the underground city. Near the surface, chambers still feel connected to ordinary life. There are spaces for animals, food preparation, storage, and movement between entrances. Lower down the passages, narrow the ceilings press closer, and the air seems to belong more to the stone than to the people who once entered it. Light from the surface disappears completely. Direction becomes uncertain. A staircase descends into another staircase. A corridor ends in collapse. And a sealed opening suggests that the mapped city may be only the accessible portion of something larger. Depth naturally invites speculation. The farther a chamber lies below the surface, the older it can appear, as though every step downward is also a step backward in time. But underground archaeology does not follow that simple rule. A deep level can be younger than a shallow one if later builders choose to excavate downward. An early chamber near the surface can be destroyed, filled, or absorbed into a later house. Floors rise as debris accumulates. Entrances shift as villages expand. Depth creates mystery, but it does not automatically create age. At Derinkuyu, only part of the known complex is open and safe for visitors. Additional spaces remain blocked by unstable rock, accumulated soil, later construction, or deliberate closure. Estimates of the total depth and number of levels vary because researchers do not always count the same features in the same way. A broad floor containing several chambers may be treated as one level, while steep connecting zones complicate the sequence. Popular descriptions often present a precise number, but the reality beneath the plateau is less orderly. Some shafts descend farther than surrounding rooms, possibly serving water or ventilation rather than habitation. Other passages slope gradually, making it difficult to decide where one level ends and another begins. Collapses can create false floors or hide stairways. A chamber filled with debris may conceal an older opening below. Mapping such a site requires more than walking through visible corridors. Surveyors must measure elevation, orientation, wall thickness, and the position of rooms relative to both the surface and one another. Even then, the full shape remains uncertain. The lowest accessible spaces are often interpreted as final refuges. Their distance from the surface provides additional protection, and narrow passages make them easier to defend. If upper entrances are compromised, inhabitants can retreat downward, sealing stone doors behind them. But greater depth brings serious disadvantages. Air circulation weakens. Carrying food and water becomes harder. Waste accumulates farther from exits. Panic becomes more dangerous when hundreds of people must move through single-file corridors. This makes it unlikely that every deep room is intended for normal living. Some may be emergency chambers used only during the worst moments. Others may hold supplies that need stable temperatures and maximum security. Certain spaces could be temporary guard positions, concealed storerooms, ritual rooms, or unfinished excavations. Assigning functions from shape alone is risky. A bare chamber can serve many purposes over centuries, and portable objects rarely remain where they were originally used. Blocked passages create the strongest sense of an unfinished story. Some are filled by natural collapse. Others appear deliberately sealed with masonry or packed debris. Deliberate closure can happen for many reasons. A tunnel may become unstable. A water source may fail. A chamber may be contaminated. A connection to another settlement may no longer be safe. Later occupants may close routes they do not understand or cannot defend. The act of sealing a passage does not necessarily conceal treasure, a burial or a forbidden chamber, despite the appeal of such interpretations. There are also tunnels rumoured to extend for kilometres between underground cities. Cappadocia contains many subterranean settlements, and some close sites may indeed have been connected by long passages. Derinkuyu has often been linked in popular accounts to Kaymakla through an underground tunnel, though the full nature continuity and ancient use of such connections remain debated. A passage described as a link may be partly blocked, incompletely surveyed, or difficult to distinguish from later excavation. The idea is plausible in some cases, but broad claims of a single enormous network joining the entire region go beyond what has been securely demonstrated. A long connecting tunnel would offer clear advantages. Communities could escape from one settlement to another without emerging. Supplies could move between refuges. A compromised entrance would not trap everyone inside. Messages could travel below ground while enemies controlled the surface. Yet such tunnels would also be expensive to build and difficult to ventilate. Their orientation would have to remain accurate over long distances. Collapse in one section could isolate the entire route. The greater the length, the greater the maintenance burden. Survey technology is beginning to reveal features that ordinary excavation cannot easily reach. Ground-penetrating radar electrical resistance measurements, three-dimensional mapping and remote imaging can identify voids or anomalies beneath the surface. These methods do not produce perfect underground maps. Different materials can create misleading signals, and volcanic geology is complex. Still, they allow researchers to detect possible chambers without opening every wall. What appears as solid rock may contain a filled corridor. What seems to be a natural cavity may show signs of deliberate shaping. Modern exploration must move slowly because the same softness that made construction possible also creates danger. Tuff weakens when exposed to moisture, vibration, and changing air conditions. Opening a sealed chamber can alter humidity and cause surfaces to crack. Tourist traffic introduces heat, carbon dioxide, and physical wear. Excavation may reveal a passage while destabilizing the ceiling above it. Archaeologists must balance discovery with preservation, and sometimes the safest decision is to leave a corridor closed. This restraint frustrates the imagination. A sealed tunnel seems to demand an answer. It is easy to picture an untouched level below the known city preserved exactly as its occupants left it. In reality, many hidden spaces are likely empty, collapsed, or repeatedly disturbed in antiquity. Yet even an empty room can be important. Tool marks may reveal construction phases. Soot can indicate occupation. Sediment can contain pollen seeds. Animal remains, charcoal, or microscopic traces of human activity. The most valuable evidence may be nearly invisible. The deeper chambers also raise questions about planning. If some shafts and defensive systems extend through multiple levels, then at least portions of the city are conceived with vertical coordination. Builders are not merely adding random rooms. They understand how a change in one level affects those above and below. A ventilation shaft must remain open during expansion. A well must not be contaminated by a waste pit. A stone door must have enough space to roll into position. This suggests that later phases involve organized design even if the whole city grows gradually. Scholars still debate how much of the deepest architecture belongs to a single major expansion, and how much results from repeated smaller projects. No inscription records the work. No surviving plan shows the intended final form. The city itself is the plan revised in stone by people who rarely erase every trace of what came before. At the lowest reachable point, the mystery is therefore not a hidden machine, a lost king's tomb, or proof of an unknown civilization. It is the persistence of human labor beyond memory. Someone carries lamps and tools into complete darkness. Someone decides that the refuge must go deeper. Someone calculates where air will still move and where the ceiling will hold. Their names vanish, but the passage remains descending toward a section of history that can be measured, entered, and touched, yet not fully explained. Seen one by one, the underground cities of Cappadocia are extraordinary. Seen together, they become something more difficult to explain. Derinkuyu is not an isolated marvel carved beneath an otherwise ordinary region. Keimakli lies nearby with its own levels, shafts, storerooms, defensive stones, and tangled passages. Özkonak contains vertical communication holes and systems that may have allowed defenders to attack intruders from above. Mazatatlar in Gaziemir and many smaller settlements add further pieces to the pattern. Some are large enough to shelter substantial communities. Others consist of only a few rooms beneath houses or fields. Across Cappadocia, the ground is repeatedly opened, hollowed, and connected until the distinction between village and underground refuge becomes increasingly uncertain. The number of known subterranean sites continues to change because many are discovered accidentally. A wall is broken during renovation. A floor collapses beneath a courtyard. A farmer clears a blocked opening. A tunnel appears behind a storage room that local families have used for generations without knowing how far it continues. Some chambers are recorded and protected. Others remain private, unstable, or partly filled. This means any count is provisional. The mapped sites are only the visible portion of a wider tradition of underground construction. Not every cavity belongs to a city. Cappadocia is filled with rock-cut storerooms, churches, houses, pigeon lofts, burial chambers, cisterns, and natural openings enlarged by people. A few interconnected rooms do not necessarily indicate a refuge for thousands. Archaeologists must distinguish between domestic basements, monastic spaces, agricultural facilities, and defensive complexes. That distinction is not always clear because one place can serve several functions across time. A wine cellar may later become an escape route. A church may be added inside an older storage network. A village shelter may expand until it resembles a city. The regional pattern suggests that underground construction is not the achievement of one ruler directing one enormous project. It is a shared strategy embedded in local life. Communities across the plateau understand the same basic principles. They know how to cut tough without bringing down the ceiling. They know how to position air shafts, storage pits, wells, and narrow defensive passages. Similar solutions appear in different settlements because knowledge travels through families, craftsmen, religious communities, and neighboring villages. This does not require a centralized underground empire. The similarities may arise because people face similar problems in similar geology. Soft volcanic rock invites the same forms. Raiders create the same need for concealment. Stable underground temperatures reward the same methods of storage. Yet the repetition is too extensive to be accidental. The region develops a subterranean building tradition, refined through long experience and passed forward even when political borders change. Connections between sites remain one of the most intriguing possibilities. Some nearby settlements contain tunnels leading away from their main chambers. A few may once have linked separate neighborhoods or villages. Others could have served as emergency exits opening beyond the visible settlement. Long underground routes would allow inhabitants to move beneath watched roads or escape a compromised refuge. They might also permit communication during raids, carrying messages between communities without exposure. The practical challenges are considerable. A tunnel extending for kilometers requires accurate direction, continuous excavation, ventilation, and maintenance. Builders working from opposite ends must avoid missing one another. Spoil must be removed or stored. Water seepage and weak layers must be managed. A narrow connection can become a trap if it collapses. For these reasons, claims that every major underground city formed part of one continuous network should be treated carefully. The evidence supports many local systems and possible connections, but not a single proven underworld stretching uninterrupted beneath all of Cappadocia. Even without such a vast network, the social network above ground may have been equally important. Villages can warn one another of approaching danger. Riders smoke signals, bells, or messengers can spread news across valleys. Communities farther from the threat gain time to gather food and move underground. Refuge sites may be shared by several surface settlements. A small hamlet without deep tunnels might retreat to a larger nearby complex. In this sense, the underground cities function as regional infrastructure. Their distribution also reflects the rhythms of agriculture. People must live close to fields, grazing land and water. They cannot simply abandon exposed plains for permanent mountain fortresses. Underground refuges allow them to remain productive during peace, while preserving a defensive option during crisis. The system is not built to separate life from the surface forever. It is built to protect surface life until danger passes. This helps explain why entrances are often integrated into ordinary buildings. A stable kitchen, storeroom, or courtyard may conceal the route downward. The underground is not distant from daily routine. It begins beneath it. Children grow up near doorways that can transform a household space into an entrance to communal safety. Supplies move below during harvest and return above when needed. The city beneath and the village above form one organism, shifting activity according to season, weather, and threat. At some sites, several entrances suggest that different families or districts maintain their own access points. Once below, passages merge into broader communal areas. This arrangement preserves both privacy and cooperation. A household controls its entrance during normal times, but the deeper network belongs to the wider community during emergencies. Such a system would require agreements about maintenance, storage, defense, and the use of shared wells. Conflict within the network is possible. One district may control the safest entrance or largest storeroom. Families may dispute access to water. Newcomers seeking shelter could strain supplies prepared for local residents. The architecture itself cannot reveal how these tensions are resolved, but collective survival requires rules. The underground world is therefore not only an engineering network, it is a political one built from trust obligation and the knowledge that one poorly guarded entrance can endanger everyone. Lesser-known sites show how varied the system can be. Some contain broad chambers suitable for caravans or animals, suggesting commercial or seasonal use as well as refuge. Others include churches and burial spaces that point to long religious occupation. A few appear unfinished, their passages ending in fresh-looking tool marks where work suddenly stopped. Some may have been abandoned because the rock proved unstable. Others were replaced by larger refuges nearby. The evidence remains incomplete because modern settlement continues above many ancient spaces. Roads, houses, utilities, and farming make excavation difficult. Opening one chamber may threaten a building overhead. Legal ownership can divide a single underground complex between several properties. Tourism brings funding and attention, but it also encourages a focus on spectacular sites, while smaller ones receive less study. What survives nonetheless reveals a region adapted to danger at an extraordinary scale. The underground cities are not isolated monuments standing apart from society. They are woven beneath homes, farms, churches, and paths. Their entrances are scattered because the people who use them are scattered. Their passages converge because survival requires convergence. Across the plateau, communities create separate hidden worlds that may never have formed one continuous physical city. Yet together they function like a buried civilization beneath the visible one. Above ground are fields, roads, rulers and armies. Below ground is another map known locally inherited quietly and activated when the surface becomes unsafe. Within that buried map, some chambers hold more than food and defensive stones. They contain crosses, altars, burial niches and spaces shaped for worship. The underground is not only where bodies are hidden from violence, it becomes a place where communities carry belief into the darkness and transform a refuge into sacred ground. Faith changes the underground city in ways that are visible even after almost everything else has vanished. Food decays, wooden objects rot, textiles disappear, and the voices of the people are lost completely, but crosses remain cut into walls. Small apses survive at the ends of chambers. Niches for lamps still mark places where worshippers once gathered. Burial spaces, benches, painted surfaces, and simple sanctuaries reveal that the world below is not used only as a temporary defensive machine. At certain times it becomes a religious landscape shaped by communities that carry sacred practice into the same darkness, where they store grain shelter animals and wait for enemies to pass. Christianity takes root deeply in Cappadocia. By the late Roman and Byzantine periods, the region is associated with bishops, theologians, monastic communities, hermits, and rock-cut churches. The famous churches of Gurem and other valleys display elaborate paintings and carefully organized interiors, but the smaller sanctuaries inside underground cities are usually more restrained. Some are simple rooms modified with an altar area. Others contain carved crosses or shallow niches. Their modest scale fits the conditions below. A refuge does not need a monumental basilica. It needs a place where frightened people can gather, pray conduct rites, bury the dead, and preserve a sense of order when the surface world appears to be collapsing. The presence of churches has sometimes encouraged the belief that Christians created the underground cities entirely to escape Roman persecution. The story is emotionally powerful, hidden believers descending beneath the earth, sealing doors behind them, and worshipping in secret while imperial authorities search above. Such events may have occurred in limited circumstances, and periods of persecution certainly create fear. Yet the archaeological pattern is broader and older. Many underground spaces predate their Christian features. Churches are often inserted into existing complexes, showing that Christian communities inherit and transform places whose first builders may have followed entirely different beliefs. This transformation is important. A chamber once used for storage can become sacred without losing its practical surroundings. A family moving toward worship passes animal stalls, kitchens, wells, and defensive doors. Sacred and ordinary space exist beside one another because underground life leaves little room for separation. The same walls protecting bodies also protect rituals, books, vessels, and memories. Religion becomes part of the infrastructure of survival. In moments of danger, ritual provides rhythm. Underground occupation destroys the normal markers of time. There is no sunrise in the deepest levels, no changing sky, and little sense of weather beyond shifts in air and moisture. Lamps are lit and extinguished according to need rather than daylight. Prayers, meals, and religious observances may help divide the hours. A community that knows when to gather and what words or gestures to repeat can maintain a sense of continuity even when everything familiar has been left above. The psychological effect should not be underestimated. Fear thrives in uncertainty, and the underground refuge contains uncertainty everywhere. People do not know whether attackers remain nearby, whether their homes are burning, or whether the next sound in a passage belongs to a neighbour or an intruder. Shared belief gives meaning to endurance. Suffering can be interpreted as trial protection, as grace, and survival as obligation. This does not remove panic, but it gives people a language for it. Burial spaces reveal the most serious side of this sacred underground. Death during refuge is unavoidable in a large population. Illness, injury, age, and childbirth continue below. Bodies cannot always be carried to surface cemeteries immediately. Some underground chambers contain graves or niches associated with Christian use, though dating individual burials can be difficult. A burial area may serve a religious community over many years, rather than only during a siege. Still, its presence confirms that the underworld can become a place of permanent memory, not merely temporary concealment. To bury someone underground changes the character of the city. A refuge is normally entered with the intention of leaving. A grave remains. The dead become part of the place, linking future occupants to earlier crises and earlier faith. Families returning during another period of danger may pass burial chambers holding ancestors or respected members of the community. The underground then carries emotional weight beyond its practical function. It becomes a landscape of protection and loss. Christian symbolism also alters how darkness itself is understood. In practical terms, darkness hides the community. In religious terms, it can represent suffering, death, waiting, and eventual emergence. The movement from surface to underground and back again may have carried strong spiritual associations, even if no surviving text explains them directly. Scholars still debate how consciously these meanings shaped the architecture. It is safer to say that people familiar with Christian teachings would not experience descent and closure and return as purely physical acts. Some chambers may have supported monastic or religious life during peaceful periods. Cappadocia's rock-cut environment attracts monks and hermits because isolation can be created within the landscape itself. Cells, chapels, communal rooms, and storage areas allow small religious communities to live with limited contact above ground. Yet it is difficult to distinguish a permanent monastic space from a village refuge later adapted for worship. Architecture can overlap. A secluded chamber may serve prayer in one century and defense in another. Painted decoration where it survives offers evidence of prolonged religious use, but underground conditions are both protective and destructive. Darkness limits fading from sunlight, yet moisture, soot touch, and later reuse damaged surfaces. Many painted areas may have disappeared completely. Simple carved symbols survive better because they are part of the wall. A cross scratched quickly into tuff can outlast a more elaborate image painted beside it. There is a striking humility in these marks. Surface churches can display wealth, patronage, and public authority. A cross carved in a hidden corridor may be no larger than a hand. It does not need to impress outsiders. It exists for people already inside, perhaps placed near a doorway, burial niche, or dangerous passage. Its meaning is intimate and practical, a sign that faith accompanies the community where formal architecture cannot. Religious leadership may also support organization. Priests, monks, or respected elders can help maintain calm, distribute aid care for the sick, and reinforce communal rules. In a crowded refuge, moral authority becomes as important as defensive authority. People must accept rationing, remain quiet, share space, and follow decisions made with incomplete information. Belief can strengthen that discipline, though it can also create conflict if communities differ in doctrine or allegiance. Cappadocia is no stranger to theological dispute. Christian communities in late antiquity and the Byzantine world are divided at times by arguments over doctrine, imperial policy, and church authority. Underground spaces do not exist outside these tensions. A chapel may belong to one group before passing to another. Symbols may be altered. Rooms can be rededicated. The sacred landscape changes as political and religious power changes above. Yet the deepest continuity lies in the act of carrying meaning into danger. Earlier peoples almost certainly bring their own rituals below, though their symbols are harder to identify. Christian occupation is more visible because crosses, churches, and burials survive clearly. This can create the illusion that faith enters the underground only with Christianity. More likely, every community that uses these spaces brings some understanding of protection, death fate, and the unseen. The chapels therefore tell two stories at once. They reveal a specific Christian presence especially strong in later periods, and they show a universal human need to make enclosed survival more than mere waiting. A city without daylight still requires hope. A refuge built to escape history eventually becomes a place where history, belief, and memory are preserved together. But the Christian layers also sharpen the question of what lies beneath them. If churches are carved into older rooms, then the sacred spaces are not beginnings, they are additions. Their walls rest inside a structure whose earliest phases remain largely unnamed, and the traces below the crosses point again toward builders who lived before the most visible history of the underground city began. Beneath the crosses, chapels, and burial niches lies a more difficult layer of the story. Christian communities leave some of the clearest signs in the underground cities, but they do not explain the first cuts into the rock. In many places, religious chambers appear to have been inserted into older spaces. Walls are reshaped, passages redirected, and rooms enlarged to accommodate worship. The Christian presence is real and substantial, yet it often looks like an occupation of inherited architecture rather than the beginning of the architecture itself. This distinction matters because later use can dominate what survives. A room that functions as a chapel for centuries may lose nearly every trace of its earlier purpose. Floors are leveled, niches are added, soot is cleaned, symbols are carved, burials disturb older deposits. The more important a chamber becomes to later occupants, the more thoroughly they alter it. Archaeologists are therefore left trying to reconstruct an earlier history from fragments around the edges, a blocked doorway behind an apse. An older ventilation channel crossing a religious wall tool marks beneath plaster, or a passage whose defensive design makes little sense as part of a church. The deepest uncertainty concerns how far back these earlier phases reach. Some scholars place substantial underground development in the first millennium BCE, possibly during Phrygian, Persian, or Hellenistic periods. Others argue that much of the large-scale expansion belongs to Roman and Byzantine times, when population warfare and organized Christian settlement create strong reasons to enlarge existing refuges. There may be truth in both views. Different parts of the same city can belong to widely separated periods, and no single date is likely to explain the entire complex. Phrygian builders remain strong candidates for some early rock-cut work. They are known for shaping monuments, tombs, and architectural spaces directly into the Anatolian landscape. Their experience with stone and their presence in central Anatolia make them plausible contributors. Yet the evidence does not support a simple statement that the Phrygians built every underground city. Their role may have varied from site to site, and much of their work could have been expanded beyond recognition by later occupants. The Hittites are drawn into the debate for similar reasons. Their empire dominates central Anatolia centuries earlier, and their military culture includes fortified gates, hidden routes, tunnels, and careful control of strategic landscapes. Certain underground features have been loosely linked to Hittite defensive practices. However, resemblance is not proof. A narrow tunnel used for defense can arise independently wherever people need to restrict movement. Without secure dating or unmistakable material evidence, the Hittite connection remains possible rather than established. The temptation is to search for one famous civilization worthy of the underground cities. A vast complex seems to demand a vast builder, but the architecture may owe more to anonymous continuity than imperial command. Local communities can preserve techniques across political change. When one kingdom falls, farmers remain, houses remain, wells remain, knowledge of the rock remains. New rulers may arrive without replacing everyone who already lives there. The people cutting deeper chambers could be descendants of those who cut the first storage rooms, even if the name of the state above them has changed several times. This continuity is difficult to see because ancient history is usually organized around rulers, wars, inscriptions, and cities visible on the surface. Underground construction rarely enters royal records. A king may boast of conquering a land without describing the cellars and refuges beneath its villages. Tax documents may count grain without recording where it is hidden. Military accounts may mention captured settlements, while ignoring populations that escaped below. The absence of written evidence is therefore not surprising, but it leaves the earliest builders almost entirely outside named history. Tool marks provide some clues to sequence. Older surfaces may show broader or less regular cutting, while later phases can display more controlled excavation. But technique does not develop in a straight line. A hurried Byzantine expansion may look rougher than a carefully finished earlier chamber. Different crews use different tools. Soft tuff allows even simple picks to produce similar marks across long periods. Erosion, soot plaster, and repeated scraping further blur the distinctions. Pottery and organic remains can offer better dating when found in sealed deposits. A filled passage undisturbed since antiquity may contain fragments associated with a particular period. Charcoal can sometimes be dated. Seeds, bones, and residue reveal patterns of occupation. Yet the most useful deposits are rare because underground cities are constantly cleaned and reused. A chamber prepared for emergency refuge is more valuable when empty. The very maintenance that keeps it functional removes the evidence later researchers need. This creates an archaeological paradox. The places most successfully preserved as usable shelters are often the hardest to date. Their occupants remove rubbish, repair damage, and adapt old rooms. A surface ruin can preserve history through destruction. An underground city can erase history through survival. Some architectural clues suggest that early phases were smaller and closer to the surface. Storage rooms, simple shelters, and short passages could later become the cause of deeper systems. Other evidence suggests coordinated expansion during periods of sustained danger, when communities add defensive doors, ventilation networks, protected wells, and multiple levels. The city may therefore contain alternating phases of ordinary use and emergency enlargement. Peace produces storage. War produces connection. Later peace turns defensive chambers back into workshops, churches, or cellars. What survives in the records suggests that no generation begins with an empty stone. Each inherits a problem already partly solved. A new community finds a shaft, a chamber, and perhaps a story explaining who built them. That story may be accurate, distorted, or entirely legendary. Over centuries, the builders become ancestors, strangers, giants, saints, or forgotten peoples. Oral memory can preserve the fact of antiquity while losing the details. This may explain why underground sites attract legends so easily. Even ancient occupants may have entered rooms they believed were already old. A Byzantine family sheltering beneath the chapel could have known that the lowest passage predated their grandparents, their church, and perhaps the settlement above. They might not have known who cut it. The mystery is not solely modern. It may have existed for the people who used the cities most intensively. There's no need to push the construction into an unknown prehistoric civilization to recognize its depth. 1,000 years of repeated work is enough to make origins obscure. 2,000 years can transform a cellar into an inheritance no one fully understands. Cappadocia's long occupation creates ample time for that process, especially in a material that can be altered without destroying the entire structure. Still, the possibility of very early chambers cannot be dismissed simply because dramatic claims have gathered around them. Archaeologists remain cautious because absence of proof is not proof of absence. Future excavations may reveal sealed deposits older than current expectations. New dating methods may clarify construction phases. Previously inaccessible passages may preserve evidence protected from later reuse. Scholars still debate the chronology because the evidence remains incomplete, not because every early date is impossible. The most responsible conclusion is also the least satisfying. Some underground spaces almost certainly predate the visible Christian layers. Several cultures may have contributed to their growth. The earliest phase is likely practical, local, and modest compared with the cities known today. Beyond that certainty weakens, and into that uncertainty step the grander legends, lost nations, hidden survivors, forgotten catastrophes, and builders said to belong to an age before ordinary history. These stories do not emerge from nothing. They grow from real sealed passages, real unknowns, and architecture whose makers left no names. But the gap between mystery and evidence is wide, and the next task is to cross it, without confusing what could have happened with what the stone actually proves. Legends gather most quickly where evidence is real but incomplete. Cappadocia provides the ideal conditions. The chambers are undeniably ancient. Many builders remain unnamed. Some passages are blocked. Deep levels resist excavation. The full scale of the underground landscape is still uncertain. From those facts, imagination takes a short and very tempting step toward explanations involving lost civilizations, forgotten catastrophes, and survivors from an age before recognized history. The stories feel persuasive because they attach themselves to genuine mystery. Their weakness lies not in the questions they ask, but in the certainty of the answers they provide. One popular claim places the origins of the underground cities near the end of the last ice age, when climate shifts, floods, and rapid environmental changes affect human communities across many regions. In this version, a prehistoric population retreats underground to escape extreme cold falling debris, solar disaster, or some other global catastrophe. The shelters are then abandoned, forgotten, and rediscovered by later civilizations who merely reuse structures already thousands of years old. There is no doubt that the end of the Ice Age brings dramatic change. Glaciers retreat, sea levels rise, ecosystems shift, and human groups adapt to new environments. Some changes occur rapidly enough to be disruptive, but connecting those global processes directly to Cappadocia's underground cities requires evidence that has not been found. There are no securely dated construction phases showing that the major complexes were carved during that prehistoric period. No sealed Ice Age occupation layer has been demonstrated inside the known cities. The possibility of earlier human use of natural caves is entirely reasonable, but a cave used by hunter-gatherers is not the same as a multi-level engineered settlement. Another theory focuses on the volcanic history of the region. Because Cappadocia is created by eruptions, some imagine that the cities were built as shelters against volcanic ash, toxic gases, or prolonged darkness after a massive eruption. The idea has a certain visual power, people disappearing below while ash buries the landscape above. Yet the timing presents a problem. The great volcanic processes that create most of the tuff formations occur long before the recognized periods of large-scale human construction. Later volcanic activity exists in Anatolia, but no known eruption neatly explains the creation of the entire underground system. More importantly, an underground refuge is not necessarily safe during a nearby eruption. Ash can block ventilation shafts. Toxic gases can descend into low spaces. Earthquakes can collapse tunnels. Water sources can become contaminated. The cities are far better adapted to threats moving across the surface, such as raiders and armies, than to the ground itself becoming unstable. They may provide temporary protection from distant ashfall, but this does not establish volcanism as their original purpose. Flood theories face similar problems. Underground chambers can protect people from weather, but they are dangerous during major flooding. Water seeks low spaces, tunnels fill wells overflow, and escape routes disappear. Cappadocia is far inland and elevated compared with regions affected by post-glacial sea level rise. Local flash floods do occur in valleys, yet the deepest underground cities would be poor places to endure prolonged inundation. The geology that invites excavation also absorbs and channels water in complicated ways. A more extravagant group of theories proposes that the builders possess advanced technology lost to history. Supporters point to the scale of excavation, the depth of shafts, the precision of certain rooms, and the enormous quantity of stone removed. They argue that simple ancient tools cannot account for such work. This claim underestimates both the softness of volcanic tuff and the cumulative power of labour. Stone that appears formidable today can be cut efficiently with picks, hammers, and patience. A chamber expanded across generations does not require machinery. It requires time, organisation, and people willing to work in difficult conditions. Ancient societies repeatedly accomplish large projects with methods that seem slow only when viewed from the perspective of modern machines. Canals, terraces, mines, roads, tombs, and city walls all involve immense labour. The underground cities are unusual in form, but not beyond known human capability. Their irregular layouts and visible tool marks actually support gradual manual excavation, rather than hidden industrial technology. Some stories go further, invoking unknown races, giants, or non-human builders. These claims usually begin with the assumption that ordinary people could not have created such spaces. Archaeology offers no support for that assumption. The corridors are sized for normal human bodies. Steps, doorways, benches, storage niches, and defensive systems all reflect familiar human needs. Where ceilings are low, this is often because narrow construction saves labour and strengthens defence, not because the builders were physically different. The most persistent fringe theories connect Cappadocia to legendary lost civilizations such as Atlantis. The argument is rarely based on direct evidence. Instead, it relies on resemblance, imagined migration, and the general idea that an advanced society vanished during a global disaster. The underground cities then become surviving outposts of that lost world. Such theories are difficult to disprove completely because they can absorb any absence of evidence as proof of concealment. But archaeology works in the opposite direction. A claim becomes stronger when it explains actual material patterns better than ordinary alternatives. In Cappadocia, the ordinary alternatives are already powerful. The region contains workable stone long settlement continuity. Repeated warfare, agricultural storage needs established traditions of rock-cut architecture and clear evidence of later Christian refuge. These factors together explain why underground complexes emerge and expand. They do not answer every question, but they require fewer unsupported assumptions than a vanished global civilization. There is also a danger in treating mystery as failure. When archaeologists say the earliest phase is uncertain, this does not mean every proposed origin becomes equally likely. Uncertainty has limits. A poorly dated chamber may belong to several plausible ancient periods, But that does not make prehistoric superbuilders as probable as known Anatolian communities. The evidence remains incomplete, yet it still favours some explanations over others. Popular legends survive because they offer a single dramatic event where archaeology offers gradual development. A catastrophe is easier to imagine than centuries of storage rooms becoming shelters, shelters becoming networks, and networks becoming cities. A lost people is easier to remember than many unnamed communities contributing small changes over time. Mystery prefers a vanished architect. History often gives us inheritance repair improvisation and work without fame. Still, the legends reveal something valuable. They show how deeply the underground cities disturb modern expectations. People assume cities should rise upward, announce themselves, and display power. Cappadocia reverses that logic. Its greatest structures disappear into the ground. Their builders leave little public memory. Their scale is encountered only by entering. This makes them feel detached from ordinary history even when they are not. The responsible interpretation does not drain the sites of wonder. It replaces impossible certainty with a deeper form of strangeness. The underground cities do not need unknown technology to be extraordinary. Their achievement lies in coordinated survival across generations. They are built not once but repeatedly. They are not monuments to a single ruler but accumulated responses to danger. They outlast the names of the people who shape them because anonymity is part of their function. Fringe theories imagine one forgotten catastrophe forcing humanity underground. The archaeological record suggests something more persistent, not one disaster but recurring insecurity, not one lost civilization, but many communities learning from those before them. Not a secret technology but the slow perfection of concealment, and eventually the conditions that make such concealment necessary begin to change. Armies still cross Anatolia, states still rise and fall, but warfare, settlement, trade, and political control take new forms. The underground cities remain beneath the villages, yet fewer people need to vanish into them. The question shifts from why they were built to why a world so carefully maintained was gradually left behind. Abandonment rarely arrives as a single moment. There is no final day when every lamp is extinguished, every stone door rolled open, and every family agrees that the underground city will never be needed again. Instead, use fades unevenly. One passage is blocked because part of the ceiling becomes unstable. A lower chamber fills with debris. A well is no longer maintained. A household converts an old entrance into storage. A chapel remains active after the defensive rooms around it has fallen silent. Centuries later, villagers may still use the upper chambers without knowing where the deepest tunnels lead. The underground cities do not become useless because danger disappears. Anatolia continues to experience warfare, migration, rebellion, and political change. What changes is the form of that danger and the structure of the societies facing it. A refuge designed for short raids works best when attackers move quickly, search, briefly seize what they can, and then withdraw. It is less effective against permanent occupation, organized administration, population transfer, or enemies who already understand the region's subterranean defenses. As larger states strengthen control over roads and settlements, some rural communities gain greater security. Garrisons, fortified towns, tax systems, and local officials may offer imperfect protection, but even imperfect protection reduces the need to maintain enormous hidden complexes. A functioning underground city demands constant work. Entrances must remain concealed and accessible. Ventilation shafts must be cleared. Collapsed corridors must be repaired. Wells must be kept clean. Grain stores must be protected from damp rodents and insects. A refuge neglected during peace may fail when danger returns. The burden is not only physical, Knowledge must also be preserved. Children need to learn the routes. Families need to know which doors can be sealed and which shafts provide air. Communities must agree on the use of shared storage and water. If people move away, convert to different forms of settlement, or lose contact with neighbouring households, the network becomes harder to manage. A tunnel known to one generation becomes a rumour to the next. Political transformation reshapes the surface world. Byzantine authority weakens in Anatolia, frontier zones shift and new powers enter the region. Seljuk expansion, local principalities and later Ottoman control alter military patterns, settlement organization and systems of taxation. These transitions are complex and often violent, so they do not instantly end the use of underground refuges. Some sites may continue to shelter people well into medieval and even later periods. Yet the long-term trend moves away from large communal occupation below ground. One reason is that warfare becomes more capable of overcoming concealment. Armies familiar with local practices can search systematically for hidden entrances. Captives can be forced to reveal routes. Smoke can be introduced into ventilation shafts. Wells can be controlled. Surface buildings can be occupied for long periods, turning temporary concealment into entrapment. The underground city is most powerful when the enemy lacks time and knowledge. Once both are available, the same depth that protects inhabitants can imprison them. Firearms do not immediately make underground defences obsolete, but they change the broader military environment. Fortified settlements, mobile cavalry, centralized policing, and later administrative surveillance reduce the usefulness of disappearing beneath individual villages. States become better at counting populations, controlling movement, and punishing communities suspected of resistance. Hidden architecture remains valuable for storage and escape, but sustaining thousands of people below becomes less practical. Economic change matters just as much. Underground life is tied to local agriculture, household storage, and village cooperation. When trade networks expand, markets change, and people rely more on goods moving through towns, the importance of keeping entire seasonal reserves beneath each settlement may decline. Surface warehouses, caravan routes, and urban centres create different patterns of security and vulnerability. Communities still store grain and wine underground, but storage does not require maintaining every defensive corridor. Population movement also leaves its mark. War taxation, religious pressure, opportunity, and environmental hardship cause villages to shrink, relocate, or disappear. An underground city built for a large community becomes impossible to maintain if only a few families remain. Water systems fail when neglected. Upper entrances collapse. Fields are divided differently. New houses are built without regard for old shafts, sometimes sealing or destroying them accidentally. The hardship of subterranean occupation should not be forgotten. These places are impressive precisely because living in them is difficult. They are dark, cramped, smoky, and unsanitary when crowded. They protect people from immediate violence but introduce other dangers. Whenever the surface becomes secure enough, normal life returns above. Sunlight, open air, easier movement, cleaner water, and access to fields are not luxuries. They are the conditions in which communities are meant to live. This helps explain why the cities can be both highly developed and rarely occupied at full capacity. Their scale represents preparedness, not necessarily permanent population. A chamber may stand empty for years while remaining essential in memory. Once the expectation of emergency weakens, maintenance begins to seem wasteful. A blocked passage is left blocked. A damaged door is not replaced. The city gradually loses the ability to function as one integrated refuge. Religious change may preserve some areas while allowing others to decay. Chapels remain meaningful even after defensive use declines. Burial spaces continue to attract visitors. Monastic communities may occupy selected chambers. Elsewhere, churches are abandoned as congregations move or political conditions shift. Painted walls darken beneath soot. Altars are damaged. Sacred rooms become storage again or simply disappear behind collapsed entrances. Later inhabitants often reuse the upper levels without preserving the older system. Cellars remain useful for wine grain cheese and animals. Pigeon houses are cut into rock faces. Existing chambers are enlarged for domestic purposes. Stone from collapsed areas may be removed or used elsewhere. A defensive tunnel can become a rubbish pit. This reuse both preserves and destroys. It keeps some entrances open while burying the original logic of the city. Scholars still debate when particular sites cease to function as large refuges because abandonment is difficult to date. A city can be unused for a century, reopened during crisis, then abandoned again. Pottery from a later period may show reuse rather than continuous occupation. A Christian symbol may remain visible in a chamber later used by people of another faith. The archaeological record records returns as well as departures. There may also have been emotional reasons for leaving the deepest levels behind. A place associated with siege, illness, burial, or catastrophe can become feared. Stories grow around collapsed passages. Children are warned away from shafts. A chamber where people died may be sealed deliberately. What began as practical caution can become legend, and legend can preserve danger long after its exact cause is forgotten. Eventually, the underground world contracts. The deepest levels disappear first from daily memory. Then connecting corridors are lost. Upper rooms survive as cellars beneath houses. Entrances are covered by construction soil or rubble. The city remains physically present but socially fragmented. No one needs to destroy it. Forgetting is enough. This is how a place built through generations can vanish without going anywhere. The stone chambers endure beneath fields and streets, but the living map that once connected them is gone. A farmer may stand above a ventilation shaft without recognizing it. A family may store food in one room while a sealed doorway behind the wall leads toward dozens more. The city is abandoned not when the last person leaves, but when the final community forgets how the parts fit together. For centuries, the underground survives in this reduced state hidden beneath ordinary life. Then a wall breaks, a floor opens, or a passage is cleared, and the forgotten city begins to return not as a functioning refuge but as an archaeological world whose rediscovery raises almost as many questions as its original construction. Rediscovery rarely begins with an archaeologist standing over a map. More often it begins with damage. A wall is removed, a floor gives way. A farmer clears stones from a field and finds an opening where solid ground should have been. A homeowner enlarges a cellar and breaks through into a passage untouched for generations. In Cappadocia, the buried world returns through accidents, because the underground cities were never entirely separate from later life. They remain beneath houses, roads, courtyards, and fields, hidden not by great depth alone, but by the gradual forgetting of entrances. Derinkuyu's modern rediscovery is often described through the story of a local resident who, during work on a house in the 1960s, opened a wall and found a concealed room beyond it. Further clearing revealed additional chambers, then corridors descending into a far larger complex. The details of such stories can become polished through repetition, but their basic pattern is common across the region. An ordinary domestic space turns out to be the threshold of something immense. The surprise does not come from finding that people once carved beneath the ground. Local villagers already know of cellars and rock-cut rooms. It comes from realizing that one familiar chamber connects to levels no living resident fully remembers. Once an opening is recognized as archaeologically significant, exploration becomes methodical and dangerous. Loose debris must be removed carefully. Ceilings are checked for cracks. Air quality is monitored. Narrow shafts are mapped before anyone crawls through them. Every cleared passage can change the flow of air and moisture affecting surfaces that have remained stable while sealed. A corridor safe for centuries may begin to weaken after exposure. Early exploration does not always follow modern archaeological standards. In many underground sites, rooms are emptied before deposits are recorded in detail. Debris thought to be worthless may contain the best evidence for dating. Pottery fragments, animal bones, charcoal seeds, textile fibers and microscopic residues can reveal who occupied a chamber and what they did there. Once removed without context, much of that information is lost. The desire to open the city can destroy parts of the history hidden inside it. Mapping presents a different challenge. Underground cities refuse the simplicity of surface plans. Corridors overlap at different elevations. Shafts connect rooms that appear distant on a flat map. Stairways twist around wells. Passages that seem parallel may actually cross several meters apart vertically. Surveyors must record not only length and direction, but depth, slope, ceiling height, wall thickness, and the relationship between every chamber and the surface above. Modern three-dimensional mapping makes the hidden geometry easier to understand. Laser scanners can capture millions of measurements, producing detailed models of rooms and corridors. Photogrammetry combines overlapping images to reconstruct surfaces, including tool marks and damaged walls. These methods preserve a digital record even where physical access must later be restricted. They also reveal distortions that are difficult to see while standing inside a cramped chamber. Ground-based geophysical techniques offer glimpses beyond visible walls. Radar electrical resistance and other forms of subsurface sensing can identify possible voids-filled passages or changes in material. Yet Cappadocia's geology complicates every signal. Natural fractures can resemble tunnels. Moisture creates false anomalies. Different layers of tuff respond differently. Technology can suggest where to investigate, but it cannot replace excavation or direct observation. Excavation itself must remain selective. Opening every suspected chamber would be impossible and destructive. Some passages lie beneath modern buildings, others are too unstable. A collapsed tunnel may be holding up the floor above it. Removing debris can transfer weight and trigger further collapse. In many cases, the most responsible choice is to record what can be reached and leave the rest sealed. Tourism changes the priorities again. Underground cities attract visitors because they offer something few archaeological sites can provide: the physical experience of entering another world. The descent is immediate. Ceilings lower, light disappears. Stone doors and ventilation shafts become understandable in a way they never could from photographs alone. Tourism brings funding, employment, and international attention, but it also introduces pressure. Thousands of feet wear down soft tuff. Hands touch walls. Body heat and exhaled moisture alter the underground climate. Artificial lighting encourages biological growth in damp areas. Wider walkways, railings, signs, and emergency systems improve safety, but change the archaeological environment. Some routes must be closed to protect fragile chambers. Others are reinforced in ways that make them safer while obscuring original surfaces. Conservation becomes a struggle against the very qualities that made the cities possible. Tuff is easy to carve because it is soft. That softness also makes it vulnerable. Water entering through cracks dissolves and weakens the rock. Freeze and thaw cycles near the surface enlarge fractures. Vibrations from traffic and construction can destabilize ceilings. Modern plumbing leaks into ancient chambers. A building erected above a forgotten shaft adds weight where none was intended. The underground cities are therefore not frozen relics. They continue to change. Walls flake. Floors erode. entrances collapse and reopen. Conservation teams must decide which alterations preserve the site and which distort it. Reinforcing a ceiling with modern material may prevent destruction, but it can also hide evidence. Improving drainage may save one chamber while directing water toward another. No intervention is neutral. New discoveries continue to reshape the map. Large underground complexes identified near modern settlements suggest that well-known sites may not be the largest examples. Some newly recorded areas include extensive rooms, long corridors, animal spaces and signs of occupation spread beneath broad sections of land. Each discovery renews public excitement, and headlines often present it as the oldest, deepest or largest underground city ever found. Such claims should be treated carefully until excavation and dating are complete. Size is especially difficult to compare. One site may cover a broad area but descend only a few levels. Another may be deeper but more compact. A third may include disconnected clusters counted as one complex. Estimates of population capacity are equally uncertain. The number of chambers does not directly reveal how many people lived there at once. Storage volume, ventilation, water animals, and duration of occupation all matter. Spectacular numbers travel more easily than cautious analysis. What modern research does confirm is that the underground tradition is more extensive than earlier generations realized. The famous cities are not isolated curiosities. They belong to a landscape shaped by repeated excavation across centuries. New surveys reveal how densely surface settlement and subterranean architecture overlap. In some places, modern residents live above ancient rooms they have never entered. Local knowledge remains essential. Archaeologists may bring instruments, but villagers often know where air rises from cracks in winter, where livestock avoid unstable ground, or where a cellar wall sounds hollow. Family stories preserve the memory of blocked passages. Place names may refer to wells, caves, or vanished churches. These clues are not always accurate, but they guide investigation toward features absent from formal records. Rediscovery therefore becomes a meeting between scientific method and inherited memory. The old city returns piece by piece, not as a complete answer. Every opened room adds detail while exposing new uncertainties. A passage leads to collapse. A shaft reaches an unmapped level. A wall contains an older doorway. The more the underground is documented, the clearer its complexity becomes, and the harder it is to reduce to one date, one people, or one purpose. The buried world was built to evade attention, and even modern research cannot fully overcome that design. Much remains inaccessible, sealed or hidden beneath living communities. Yet enough has emerged to show that Cappadocia's underground cities are not merely archaeological spectacles. They are records of repeated human adaptation preserved inside a landscape where memory can disappear above ground while architecture continues below. What the underground cities preserve is not a single answer, but a pattern of human behavior repeated across centuries. The builders do not leave behind a clear origin story. There is no surviving name for the first person who cuts a chamber into the volcanic rock. No inscription marking the moment separate shelters become a connected refuge, and no reliable record of how many times the stone doors are rolled shut against danger. What remains is architecture shaped by necessity, and that architecture reveals a society that understands survival as something collective, prepared in advance and hidden from view. The underground world begins with the simplest advantages. Stone protects stored grain from heat. A cellar preserves wine. A hidden room keeps tools and seed beyond the reach of thieves. These practical spaces do not yet require a city, but once communities learn that the rock can be entered safely, every crisis offers another reason to go deeper. A raid turns storage into shelter. Repeated raids turn shelter into defense. Population growth turns isolated chambers into shared corridors. New faiths transform old rooms into chapels. New enemies make ancient passages useful again. This process creates a form of architecture without a final design. Surface monuments are often built toward completion. A temple palace or fortress is planned, raised, dedicated, and displayed. Cappadocia's underground cities remain permanently unfinished. There is always another room that could be opened, another entrance that could be concealed, another defensive barrier that could be added. Their shape follows changing need rather than a ruler's ideal plan. That irregularity is not a flaw. It is the record of adaptation. The cities also preserve an unusual form of power. Their builders do not attempt to dominate the landscape by rising above it. They survive by removing themselves from it. Towers can be seen from a distance. Walls can be surrounded. Palaces attract conquerors because they announce wealth. The underground city rejects display. Its strongest feature is the absence it creates on the surface. An approaching army finds deserted homes, empty paths, and perhaps a few visible stores already stripped of value. The community's greatest defensive achievement is to appear no longer present. This makes the cities difficult to place within traditional histories of empires. Written records favor rulers, battles laws, religious disputes, and public construction. The underground preserves the quieter history of people who are usually mentioned only when taxed, recruited, converted, displaced, or conquered. Farmers, herders, craftspeople, children, religious communities, and local defenders shape these chambers without expecting their labor to become famous. Their work is meant to remain unseen even in their own lifetime. Yet invisibility does not mean isolation. Building and maintaining the cities requires cooperation. Ventilation shafts must serve multiple households. Wells must remain protected from waste. Grain storage must be shared or carefully allocated. Entrances must be guarded. Routes must be known. During occupation, lamps, water, food, and space become communal concerns. One family cannot defend a deep network alone. The underground settlement succeeds only when individual survival is tied to the survival of the group. That cooperation may have been fragile. The architecture does not prove that underground communities were harmonious. Crowding, fear, hunger, and unequal access to supplies could produce conflict. Wealthier households may have controlled better chambers or larger stores. Outsiders seeking refuge may have been refused. Religious and political divisions do not vanish simply because everyone descends beneath the earth. What survives in the record suggests organization, but the exact rules, tensions, and failures remain beyond recovery. The cities preserve contradiction as clearly as they preserve ingenuity. They are shelters that can become traps. Their depth provides safety while increasing dependence on air and water. Their secrecy protects inhabitants while cutting them off from information. Their narrow corridors weaken attackers but slow evacuation. Their walls endure because the stone is workable, yet the same softness makes them vulnerable to collapse. No single explanation fully accounts for every chamber, because each solution creates a new problem. This is why the most dramatic claims are unnecessary. The underground cities do not require forgotten machines or unknown races to be astonishing. Their real scale emerges from ordinary tools used over extraordinary spans of time. A pick strikes the wall, a basket of debris is carried away, a shaft is deepened, a doorway is sealed. The action is small, but generations repeat it. What seems impossible as one project becomes understandable as inheritance. Their legacy also survives beyond the chambers themselves. Cappadocia's rock-cut churches, homes, storerooms, pigeon houses, and monasteries all belong to a wider relationship between people and geology. The landscape is not treated as a backdrop. It becomes a building material, a climate system, a defense and an archive. Communities do not simply settle upon the plateau, they enter it and reshape its interior. Modern visitors experience only a controlled fraction of that world. Lights mark safe routes, railings guide movement, signs identify kitchens, wells, stables and chapels. Yet even with these explanations, the body understands something immediately that maps cannot convey. The descent feels longer than expected. The air changes, the ceiling lowers, sound behaves strangely. A circular stone door appears not as a museum object, but as a barrier that could turn a crowded passage into a final line of defense. That physical experience gives the cities their lasting power. They are not ruins viewed from across a fence. They surround the visitor. The stone remains close enough to touch. The darkness beyond the lit route suggests chambers still blocked, collapsed, or unrecorded. The known city ends at a barrier, but the geology continues. Somewhere behind sealed walls may lie more rooms, more deposits, or simply more evidence of labour without names. Future research may narrow the chronology. Sealed sediments may provide better dates. New mapping may reveal connections between sites. Chemical analysis may identify food smoke animals or human occupation in chambers now considered empty. Archaeologists may discover that some sections are older than expected and others far younger. The broad story will probably become more complicated rather than simpler, but certain conclusions are already clear. The underground cities are products of known human ability. They grow through repeated use. Their scale reflects the combined pressures of geography, warfare, storage, climate, religion, and communal survival. Later, Christian communities leave the most visible sacred marks, but they inherit older spaces. Fringe theories remain popular because the origins are incomplete, yet the gaps do not erase the evidence for gradual construction by generations of Anatolian people. What these cities finally reveal is not a civilization outside history, but the part of civilization history often overlooks. They show what ordinary communities build when survival matters more than display. They show how memory can be stored not in writing, but in roots, walls, shafts, and habits passed from parent to child. They show that a settlement can vanish from sight without vanishing from the land. The underground world beneath Cappadocia was built before its own history was remembered, because remembering the first builders was never the purpose. The purpose was to keep breathing, preserve food, protect children, wait through danger, and return to the surface when the world became safe enough to begin again. The entrances are quiet now. Wind moves over the plateau through dry grass and across fields laid above rooms that have not seen daylight for centuries. Villages stand where older villages stood, and roads cross a landscape still holding more empty space beneath it than the surface suggests. Somewhere below, air continues to drift through a shaft cut by hands whose names are gone. The people who made these cities did not defeat time. Their languages changed, their rulers disappeared, their fears were replaced by other fears, and eventually the living map of the tunnels broke apart. But they left behind a record more intimate than a palace wall. A doorway worn smooth shows where bodies passed. Soot above a hearth shows where someone guarded a flame. A shallow niche remembers a lamp. A stone disc waiting beside a corridor remembers the moment when survival depended on closing the world out. Perhaps that is why the underground cities feel so different from ruins beneath the open sky. Surface monuments seem to belong to distance. They stand against weather visible and exposed, asking to be remembered. These chambers do the opposite. They draw the visitor inward into spaces built for silence, concealment, and patience. Their history is not announced. It has to be entered slowly. Beyond the safe paths, passages still disappear into darkness. Some end in collapse, some may lead nowhere. Others may preserve fragments capable of changing what is known about the first builders. But even if no final chamber answers the question of origin, the cities have already revealed something enduring. Human beings do not survive only by conquering landscapes. Sometimes they survive by yielding to them, learning their weaknesses, entering their depths and waiting. Above ground, every civilization appears permanent while it lasts. Roads seem established, borders seem certain, homes feel fixed to the earth. Then armies arrive, climates shift, economies fail, beliefs change, and entire ways of life become difficult to imagine. Cappadocia preserves that fragility in reverse. The visible world changes again and again while the hidden one remains. And so the final image is not of thousands of people trapped below, nor of a lost race vanishing into legend. It is quieter than that. It is a single passage beneath the plain, empty now, carrying cool air through ancient stone. At one end lies darkness. At the other, far above, sunlight falls across a landscape that has forgotten almost everyone who once lived beneath it.